Dear Louis, I never planned to write this. Not after everything. Not after the silence, the papers, the final goodbye. But now that you're gone, there's something I need to say, maybe for you, maybe just for me. We were never perfect. But there was a time early on when we were happy. And I still remember it. The way you made me laugh without trying. The way we dreamed on cheap wine and takeout boxes. That version of us. I loved it deeply. I loved you deeply. I wish things had ended differently. I wish you had told the truth more often. I wish I hadn't stayed so long hoping you'd change. But I don't regret the years. They made me who I am. You taught me what I could survive. And because of that, I built a life rooted not in someone else's approval, but in my own peace. I don't hate you. Not anymore. What I feel is softer now. A kind of distant kindness. The kind reserved for a story long finished, but once real. You broke me, yes. But in doing so, I found the strength to put myself back together, this time better. I hope you found peace. And I hope, somehow, you knew that in your final days I didn't come out of pity. I came because I had finally learned how to forgive. Goodbye, Louis. Karen. When did they stop being partners and start becoming opponents? It didn't happen overnight. In fact, if you had visited their apartment just weeks earlier, you might have seen Louis and Karen laughing over coffee or sitting side by side, each with a laptop, silently hoping for an email that would change everything. But somewhere between the unpaid bills and silent dinners, the distance started to grow. Not across miles, but across glances, gestures, and things left unsaid. It was a Tuesday evening when it all snapped. Karen had just come home after a long day, her feet aching, her inbox overflowing, her head pounding with campaign deadlines. She opened the door expecting to find a quiet room, maybe a "how was work?" or at the very least, the sound of dishes being done. Instead, she was met with the blaring sound of a football game. There was Louis, lounging on the couch, half asleep, surrounded by snack wrappers. The kitchen was a wreck. The sink overflowed. The trash hadn't been taken out. And dinner? Well, Karen boiled pasta, sprinkled it with olive oil, and set it down quietly. That's when it happened. Is this all? Louis asked, not even looking up. You used to make full dinners. Just because you're working again doesn't mean you get to slack off. The air went still. Karen froze. Something inside her, the thing that had been stretching and straining for months, finally tore. Her voice came out sharp. Slack off? I'm juggling a full-time job, groceries, the rent, your mess, and your mother's endless phone calls. You've been unemployed for nearly a year. Maybe if someone wasn't so concerned with appearances, we wouldn't be one paycheck away from disaster. Louis's face turned red. What the hell, Karen? He shouted. You think I'm enjoying this? You think I want to be here doing nothing? I'm going to get a job, one that pays more than yours. Just wait. But deep down, they both knew that was just another promise hanging in the air, waiting to fade. And in that moment, something shifted. Karen wasn't just angry. She was tired. Tired of hoping. Tired of carrying both of their lives. Tired of pretending this was still the man she had built a life with. Louis, on the other hand, was drowning in pride. Every job rejection chipped away at his confidence. Every job Karen succeeded at reminded him of his own failure. But instead of saying that, he criticized her cooking. It's a funny thing, how resentment never shouts at first. It whispers. It clings to tiny things. The way someone loads a dishwasher, the tone used in a text message, the silence after a long sigh. But if you let it fester long enough, it will find its voice, and it will scream. And scream it did. The arguments came more often now. Louder, crueler. About things that once wouldn't have mattered. Which brand of cereal to buy, how much Karen spent on gas, how late she came home. Nothing was safe. But the real explosion came when Karen opened the bank app and saw a charge she didn't recognize. $300 at a fancy steakhouse. She walked into the living room, holding the phone like it was a weapon. What is this? She asked, her voice low. Oh, that, Louis said, shrugging. I took the guys out. They needed to see I'm still doing fine. Karen's hands trembled. You took our savings. What little we have left. and spent it on a performance? Lewis's eyes darkened. I needed to. I had to prove I'm still somebody. Karen shook her head, tears welling up. You're so afraid of looking like a failure, you're willing to become one. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. That night, Karen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking herself the question she'd been afraid to face. Could their marriage survive this? But here's the part that will stay with you. Karen didn't leave that night. Not yet. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking out. It's staying in a place that no longer feels like home, hoping something might still change. But what if it doesn't? What if the person you loved, the person you built a life with, isn't willing to meet you halfway? When did they stop being partners and start becoming opponents? It didn't happen overnight. In fact, if you had visited their apartment just weeks earlier, you might have seen Lewis and Karen laughing over coffee or sitting side by side, each with a laptop, silently hoping for an email that would change everything. But somewhere between the unpaid bills and silent dinners, the distance started to grow. Not across miles, but across glances, gestures, and things left unsaid. It was a Tuesday evening when it all snapped. Karen had just come home after a long day, her feet aching, her inbox overflowing, her head pounding with campaign deadlines. She opened the door expecting to find a quiet room, maybe a "how was work?" or at the very least, the sound of dishes being done. Instead, she was met with the blaring sound of a football game. There was Lewis, lounging on the couch, half asleep, surrounded by snack wrappers. The kitchen was a wreck. The sink overflowed. The trash hadn't been taken out. And dinner? Well, Karen boiled pasta, sprinkled it with olive oil, and set it down quietly. That's when it happened. Is this all? Lewis asked, not even looking up. You used to make full dinners. Just because you're working again doesn't mean you get to slack off. The air went still. Karen froze. Something inside her, the thing that had been stretching and straining for months, finally tore. Her voice came out sharp. Slack off? I'm juggling a full-time job, groceries, the rent, your mess, and your mother's endless phone calls. You've been unemployed for nearly a year. Maybe if someone wasn't so concerned with appearances, we wouldn't be one paycheck away from disaster. Lewis's face turned red. What the hell, Karen? He shouted. You think I'm enjoying this? You think I want to be here doing nothing? I'm going to get a job, one that pays more than yours. Just wait. But deep down, they both knew that was just another promise hanging in the air, waiting to fade. And in that moment, something shifted. Karen wasn't just angry. She was tired. Tired of hoping. Tired of carrying both of their lives. Tired of pretending this was still the man she had built a life with. Lewis, on the other hand, was drowning in pride. Every job rejection chipped away at his confidence. Every job Karen succeeded at reminded him of his own failure. But instead of saying that, he criticized her cooking. It's a funny thing, how resentment never shouts at first. It whispers. It clings to tiny things. The way someone loads a dishwasher, the tone used in a text message, the silence after a long sigh. But if you let it fester long enough, it will find its voice, and it will scream. And scream it did. The arguments came more often now, louder, crueler, about things that once wouldn't have mattered. Which brand of cereal to buy, how much Karen spent on gas, how late she came home. Nothing was safe. But the real explosion came when Karen opened the bank app and saw a charge she didn't recognize. $300 at a fancy steakhouse. She walked into the living room, holding the phone like it was a weapon. What is this? She asked, her voice low. Oh, that, Lewis said, shrugging. I took the guys out. They needed to see I'm still doing fine. Karen's hands trembled. You took our savings, what little we have left, and spent it on a performance? Lewis's eyes darkened. I needed to. I had to prove I'm still somebody. Karen shook her head, tears welling up. You're so afraid of looking like a failure, you're willing to become one. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. That night, Karen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking herself the question she'd been afraid to face. Could their marriage survive this? But here's the part that will stay with you. Karen didn't leave that night. Not yet. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't walking out. It's staying in a place that no longer feels like home. Hoping something might still change. But what if it doesn't? What if the person you loved, the person you built a life with, isn't willing to meet you halfway? If you've ever been in a relationship where there are 3 people but only 2 chairs at the table, you'll understand what came next. Karen thought the silence between her and Louis was the hardest part. She was wrong, because silence at least can offer room to breathe. But once Victoria, Louis's mother, entered the picture, even that was taken away. It started subtly. A few extra calls. Some pointed questions. Is Louis eating enough? Is he resting? Why are you working so late? She chalked it up to grief. After all, Victoria had lost her husband the year before. Karen tried to be patient, sympathetic. But sympathy has limits. And Victoria didn't come with questions. She came with judgments. You used to be such a sweet girl, she'd say. Always home. Always cooking. What happened? At first, Karen smiled through it, bit her tongue, answered the calls, sent the texts. But those calls began arriving 10, 12 times a day. At work, during lunch, on her commute. And if Karen missed one, I'm your mother now too, Victoria snapped once. Is it really so hard to pick up the phone? Karen wanted to scream. She wasn't ignoring Victoria. She was drowning. In bills. In exhaustion. In a marriage already splitting at the seams. But Louis? He didn't stop it. In fact, sometimes Karen would walk into the room and find him on the phone with his mother, whispering, calm, composed, smiling. Everything's fine, Mom. She's just overwhelmed. I've got it handled. Handled? Karen was working full-time, paying the bills, making dinner, cleaning up after his mess, and apologizing for things she hadn't done. And the only thing Louis handled was making sure his mother stayed in the dark. Because that was the unspoken rule. Don't tell Victoria the truth. Don't tell her Louis was jobless. Don't tell her the savings were gone. Don't tell her that Karen was holding up the roof with both hands while Louis stood beneath it, arms crossed. But secrets have weight, and eventually they fall. It was a Friday night when Karen finally snapped. She came home, rain-soaked, exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and found Louis laughing on the phone with his mom. He hung up just as she walked in. She says you've been cold to her, he muttered. Karen dropped her purse. Cold? She repeated. After everything I've done to keep us going? She's calling me selfish because I don't have time to sit and sip tea every weekend. Louis just shrugged. She's grieving. She needs support. Karen's voice broke. So do I. Silence. Then the final blow. Maybe she should move in, Louis said quietly. At least until she's back on her feet. Karen stared at him. You're joking. He wasn't. He looked away. She wouldn't be a burden. But Karen knew. She'd seen the signs. This wasn't about help. It was about replacing one woman's loyalty with another's control. Because here's the part nobody warns you about. Sometimes the person you love lets someone else rewrite the rules of your marriage. And you don't see it happening until your name is no longer written anywhere at all. That night, Karen stood on the balcony while rain lashed against the city below. She realized that she was no longer just fighting for her marriage. She was fighting for space to exist inside it. And she asked herself the question so many women silently whisper in the dark. Is love supposed to feel like this? What do you do when your partner lets someone else take your place? What happens when being a wife starts to feel more like being a placeholder? Karen didn't pack her bags that night. She didn't scream or break things. Instead, she lay in bed beside a man who once made her feel safe and stared at the ceiling until morning. Because sometimes the loudest decision of all is silence. Sometimes, leaving doesn't look like slamming a door or shouting, I'm done. Sometimes it's quieter than that. It's a tired sigh, a softly packed suitcase, a note left on the kitchen table with a single sentence. I need time to think. Karen hadn't planned on leaving. She'd spent so long holding everything together, hoping, explaining, bending. that it felt unnatural to step away. But one night, after another tension-filled dinner, after another voicemail from Victoria, after another evening of Lewis scrolling job boards in silence, something inside her broke. She stood at the sink, staring at the dishes. Not angry, not sad, just done. "I'm going to stay with my parents," she said, without turning around. "For how long?" Lewis asked. His voice was flat, like it didn't really matter. "A week, maybe more." He didn't stop her. He didn't even ask why. Karen drove in silence for an hour and a half, her hands gripping the wheel, her mind spinning. Her parents' home sat tucked away in a quiet suburb, the kind of place with front porches and wind chimes. When she arrived, her mother opened the door, took one look at her face, and pulled her into a hug. They didn't ask questions, not at first. They simply poured her tea, made her a plate of warm food, and let her be. That night, Karen slept for 10 straight hours, the deepest rest she'd had in months. The next morning, she told them everything. Her father's jaw tightened as she talked. Her mother nodded, occasionally squeezing Karen's hand. When Karen finished, her mom said something that stayed with her. "You don't have to prove how strong you are by staying broken." For the first time in a long time, Karen didn't have to carry the weight of anyone else's emotions. There was no Victoria to guilt-trip her, no Lewis to tiptoe around, no apartment full of silent disappointment. Just peace, just space. The week at her parents' place wasn't some grand vacation. It wasn't about running away. It was about remembering who she was before the resentment, before the endless compromises, before she stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. She went for walks with her dad, read books in the backyard, let her mom cook for her. She laughed again, felt small but revolutionary. And while she was healing, Lewis was calling. Voicemail after voicemail. First, annoyed, then guilt-tripping. "Are you seriously not going to tell me where my dry cleaning is?" Then softer. "I miss you. Come home." But Karen wasn't ready, because something had shifted in her during those quiet moments between sips of tea and sunrise walks. She realized she had been performing a marriage, not living in one. And yet, part of her still hoped. Maybe this break would open Lewis's eyes. Maybe he'd finally realize how much she carried. Maybe he'd learn. She returned home on a Sunday evening. The streetlights were flickering on. The air smelled of rain. She walked up the stairs of their apartment building, turned the key in the door, and stopped cold. The apartment was spotless. Too spotless. Not lived in. Not real. The closets were empty. The drawers bare. His shoes were gone. His toothbrush missing. And on the kitchen table, in his unmistakable handwriting, was a note. "Moved in with Mom. Don't come looking." Her knees buckled. This wasn't space. This wasn't perspective. This was abandonment. He hadn't waited. He hadn't fought. He'd taken the 1 week she gave herself and used it to erase her from the picture. Karen didn't cry right away. She just stood there, staring at the note, her mind trying to process the audacity, the cowardice. And slowly, the pain gave way to something sharper. Clarity. She called him. "You moved out?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I didn't know if you were coming back," Lewis mumbled. "I had to do something." "No, you didn't," Karen replied. "You had to do nothing. Just wait. Just try." But he hadn't. He had chosen escape. And now Karen had to choose too. So here's where we leave her, for now, in an empty apartment, with nothing but a note and a realization that sometimes walking away for a while reveals the truth you were afraid to face all along. You were always the only one trying to hold the door open. There's a moment, after the betrayal, after the silence, after the last bag is packed, when the heart finally accepts what the mind has known for a while. It's over. Karen stood in the empty apartment like a ghost in someone else's life. No shoes by the door. No half-full coffee mug in the sink. No hum of Lewis humming off-key from the bathroom. Just quiet. Cold, absolute quiet. She didn't cry. Not at first. Instead, she made a call. One she'd rehearsed in her head more times than she could count. "Hi. I need to speak to a divorce attorney." Filing for divorce wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. Louis had made his decision. He left. Not with courage, not with honesty, but with a note on a table. And for the first time in a long time, Karen chose herself. The legal process was cleaner than she expected, at least on paper. Emotionally, that was another story. Louis didn't fight her. Not really. But he didn't apologize either. When served with the divorce papers, he shrugged. "She'll cool off," he told his mother. "She always does." But Karen didn't. Because something in her had gone quiet. Not with bitterness, but with finality. She had stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. Victoria, on the other hand, did fight. She called. She cried. She raged. "How could you do this to my son?" she shrieked. "You're abandoning him when he needs you most." Karen didn't flinch. "He abandoned us the second he walked out." It all came to a head at the lawyer's office. Victoria came to the meeting. Uninvited, unwelcome, and armed with every insult she'd been saving. "You were always selfish," she spat. "You wanted a career more than a marriage. You pushed him to fail." Karen sat across the table, calm, steady, and no longer afraid. "If loving him meant losing myself, then yes, I stopped choosing that." Louis said nothing, not a word, just stared at the table, as if his signature on the papers was the only thing left of him. Then came the final blow. During financial disclosures, Karen learned the truth. Louis and Victoria had spent the entire $50,000 from the sale of their old home. Not on medical bills, not on debt, on a luxury apartment, a designer wardrobe, gourmet groceries, appearances. "We needed to look stable," Louis muttered when confronted. "People talk." Karen felt like she'd been slapped. "You spent our future on a performance?" His silence was all the answer she needed. She made sure the settlement was clean. No shared assets.
No alimony. No Thais.
She didn't want revenge. She wanted distance. When the divorce was finalized, she didn't celebrate. She didn't go out for drinks or post a cryptic quote online. She went home, to her new place, a modest house on a quiet street, where neighbors waved from porches and wind chimes danced in the breeze. She stood in the empty living room, looked around, and whispered,
Mine. No tensión. No guilt.
No waiting for someone to come home and undo the peace. Just herself. Karen bloomed. She poured herself into her work, and it showed. Promotions came. Respect followed. She became the woman in meetings people listened to. Outside of work, she came alive again, painting, hiking, laughing until her ribs ached. Friends came back into her orbit, not out of pity, but because she had returned to herself. She hadn't lost everything. She had lost the one thing that had been holding her back. And then, the final call came. An unfamiliar number. A voice she hadn't heard in over a year. "Karen. It's me."
Victoria.
Her voice was thin, weak, pleading. "We need your help." Karen's heart dropped. Louis had lost it all. The money, the apartment, the friends he tried so hard to impress. Now they were living paycheck to paycheck, struggling, hungry. "Please," Victoria whispered. "We have no one else." Karen paused. The old Karen might have gone back, might have offered money, might have driven over with groceries and guilt. But not this Karen. "I'm sorry," she said softly but firmly. "You made your choices, and now so have I." And she hung up. So here's the question. What do you do when the people who broke you come back? Hoping you've stayed the same. Karen didn't. And that made all the difference. 2 years. That's how long it had been since Karen signed her name across the bottom of that final page. The one that closed the book on her marriage. But it hadn't just ended a relationship. It ended the version of herself who accepted less. And in her place, someone new. Not colder, not harder, but clearer. Because Karen hadn't just survived heartbreak. She rewrote the rules. Her mornings looked different now. No more rushing to prepare someone else's breakfast. No more checking her phone for missed calls from Louis or passive-aggressive texts from Victoria. She made tea just the way she liked it. She sat by the window. She watched the sun cut through the trees in her small, peaceful backyard. The house wasn't big, but it was hers. Every wall was painted in colors she had chosen. Every photo on the shelves was a memory she wanted to keep. And more importantly, there was no one there to tell her what she owed them. Professionally, Karen was thriving. After returning to work full-time, she'd poured herself into her career, not as an escape, but as a declaration. A way of reminding herself that her talents weren't a footnote in someone else's life. She was now a senior strategist at her marketing firm, trusted, respected, and finally paid what she was worth. She mentored younger colleagues. She spoke at conferences. People came to her for advice now. Not because she had all the answers, but because she had been through the fire and walked out the other side. Her personal life? That healed slower. As it should. Karen didn't jump into a new romance. She didn't create a dating profile the moment she signed her divorce papers. Instead, she did something far more radical. She learned to like her own company. She rediscovered painting, picked up yoga again, went on weekend hikes with an old friend she hadn't seen since her 20s. She started hosting small dinners, potlucks, backyard barbecues, wine and laughter spilling into summer evenings. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for the first time in years, Karen didn't feel like she had to perform her life for anyone. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. There were still quiet moments, usually late at night, when the memories crept in. The way Louis used to rub her shoulders when she worked late. The dreams they once mapped out over glasses of red wine. The time they danced in the living room at 1 a.m. just because their favorite song came on. Those memories didn't haunt her anymore. They didn't make her cry. They just were a part of her story. Not the ending. Not even the climax. Just chapters. Chapters she no longer had to reread. One afternoon, Karen was trimming the roses by her front steps when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, older, thinner, and almost unfamiliar. It was Victoria. Karen's stomach tightened. "Karen," she started, her voice brittle. "He's gone. Louis." It was sudden. Karen didn't speak. Just stared. Let her finish. "I don't have anyone left," Victoria said, voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go." The old Karen might have softened. Might have invited her inside. Offered tea. Place to rest. But this Karen? She stepped forward, kind but steady. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. "But I'm not your shelter. Not anymore." Victoria's eyes welled up. Karen didn't flinch. Because here's the truth. Forgiveness doesn't always mean re-entry. You can let go of pain without reopening the door it came through. As Victoria drove away, Karen turned back to her roses. The thorns didn't scare her. They never had. She smiled, because she knew the truth. She had chosen herself. Not out of selfishness, but out of survival, out of growth, out of knowing that loving others should never come at the cost of abandoning yourself. So if you've ever been left picking up the pieces, if you've ever wondered whether you can start again after the life you built fell apart, let this be your answer. Yes. Not only can you start again, you can thrive, you can rise, you can build a life where you are not an afterthought but the main character, just like Karen did. Karen thought the story was over. Not in a tragic way, but in a quiet, settled way. She had rebuilt her life. She had found peace, balance, and a new sense of self. There were no lingering strings, no more unanswered questions. Or so she believed. Then came the call. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer. But something in her gut whispered, "Pick it up." "Hello?" she said, cautious. There was a pause. And then a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Karen, it's me. Louis." Just hearing his name again, from his own lips, felt surreal. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. But her breath caught. "I didn't know who else to call," he said quietly. "I'm at the hospital. They found something. It's bad." Karen said nothing, just listened. Louis, once too proud to even admit needing a job, now sounded like a man grasping for any hand in the dark. He wasn't calling to fix things. He wasn't asking for another chance. He was just afraid. And in that moment, Karen was hit with a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. Not love, not longing, but compassion. She went, not because she owed him, not because she had something to prove, but because at the end of the day Louis had once been her person. And some bonds, though broken, still deserve a moment of grace at the edge of goodbye. He looked older, smaller. Time and pride had stripped him of the fire he once used as armor. "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice cracked and tired. Karen sat beside the hospital bed and gave him the most honest answer she had. "Because you mattered, even if it ended badly. You were once part of my story, and I'm not ashamed of that." They talked for hours.
No blame. No begging.
Just two people acknowledging the wreckage they once survived. Louis apologized, not with excuses, but with clarity. "I didn't know how to handle failure," he said. "I thought holding on to control meant keeping my pride. I didn't see I was losing you in the process." Karen didn't cry, but she felt something loosen in her chest. Like a knot she hadn't realized was still there had finally uncoiled. "You weren't the only one who stayed too long," she admitted. "I kept waiting for the version of you I married to come back. But I had changed too." In the days that followed, Karen visited once more. Not as a wife, not as a savior, but as a witness. Someone who had loved deeply, lost honestly, and grown stronger because of it. And when Louis passed, quietly without pain, Karen didn't regret showing up. She didn't attend the funeral to be seen. She didn't bring flowers to impress anyone. She simply stood beneath a gray sky, whispered a quiet thank you, and walked away. Back at home, Karen lit a candle in her reading room. No photos.
No es rine.
Just a small moment to honor the complexity of a life that touched hers. Deeply, painfully, beautifully. She didn't mourn what could have been. She honored what was. Because sometimes healing doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means knowing it did, and still choosing peace. So here's the question. If the past knocked on your door one last time, would you answer? Karen did. Not because she wanted to go back, but because she had moved so far forward. She could afford to look back without fear.